So my topic for today is that I am afraid. I am afraid and I am going to do it anyway. I am not sure if I'm getting much sound. Trying to turn some stuff up. See if I can hear myself a little bit better. Starts to get too echoey. Still figuring all of this out. Okay, so my topic, I'm afraid. You know, that's super echoey. I think I gotta turn that down. Okay. I think it's this. Okay. Okay, now I'm not hearing so much echo, which I think is good. Okay. So I can cut that out, no big deal. Um, you know, this is really scary. Doing this is scary. Doing this on my own is scary. Doing this and then publishing it and then sending it out there into the universe is really scary. And I'm definitely really afraid. So this morning, I'm thinking about what it is that I should record, what it is that I should talk about on here. And I realized that I am I am so afraid. And what's kind of funny about it, I guess, is that I have two really huge fears. One of my fears is being really stupid, being really ridiculous, feeling a lot of shame, feeling very rejected, not belonging. So that's one, well, that's a bunch of fears, but it all is in the same idea, I think. And then the other one is, well, I guess it's kind of the same, but it's like not mattering, no one will care, it's not important. I should just shut up. I need to stop talking. Nobody wants to hear anything that I have to say. I'm not an important enough person to have anything to say. I don't come from a place of enough expertise. I don't come from a place of enough specialization. So what is it that I think that I can add collectively to the conversation? So this has been playing in my mind for, well, it's probably been a year, maybe even like a solid 6 months that I decided that what I wanted to do. And the long story is that I am about to be 45 and I have, like everyone who's about to be 45, gone through, a lot of life and a lot of living. And a lot of it has been absolutely phenomenal. And a lot of it has been extremely challenging. And I am startled still to this day at how much I'm still trying to figure it out. Maybe we are always going to be trying to figure it out. Maybe that isn't really something that ever really stops. Like if one day I just all of a sudden have it all figured out, maybe like that's the end. And then, I don't know, then we die or something happens. I'm not totally obviously sure about this, but so for a very long time, I was just living in straight survival mode. And, um, it's a difficult place to be, but I think there's so many people who are existing there all of the time. It's probably a privilege to now be on the other side of survival mode because I'm not in survival mode right now, meaning that most emergencies that take place, I probably can deal with. I have a decent amount of, not really certainty because you never really have certainty, but I would say more security than I've had in the past, which is interesting because most of my feeling of security and steadiness and ability to take care of emergencies by myself with the kids came post divorce for me, um, which this is just a different story. But there came a time where I realized that a lot of what it was that I had sought out to accomplish or to do, which was really honestly very basic, just trying to meet the basic needs of the people who I'm responsible for on a daily basis. I have three children. Well, they're adults now, but I have three young adult children who have been at home. I also have a stepson from my previous marriage who is older. But, I've had these kids to take care of. And so really it was just figuring out how in the world to do that. I was a young mom and I was young married, young mom. And I hit this point in life, as so many people do, where everything that I thought was supposed to happen and unfold didn't. It all turned pretty hard, actually. And so I was suddenly in a position where I had to figure out how to take myself and my kids and keep us safe and a roof over our head and keep us all fed. And I really didn't have much of an idea of how to make that happen all on my own. I certainly had jobs previously, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'd had much of a career. I did a stint for a little while as a mortgage broker, and that was career adjacent. I had a very, very young family at the time that I was trying to do that. I did that for several years, but it was super hard. I had started it and then had a baby and then went back to work about 3-4 days after my third baby was born. There was a lot going on. So I do think that there was like the potential of a career there, but when the housing market crashed, so 2008 to 2012, I decided not to renew my license because there wasn't that much work. And also it was just extremely challenging trying to do everything while also raising this really young family. And so I was relieved at the time. I think I found a job at Starbucks that gave me health insurance for the family while working very crazy hours, but also not having to work very many. I think I could get health insurance at 25 hours a week. And so I did that. Never worked so hard for so little money, but the insurance was wonderful. Anyway, all of this to say that, I started my, let's say, single again, divorced mom life, terrified, really, really afraid. But the idea that I was going to stay on the path that I was at the time, which was to continue in the marriage, to continue in the relationship. And I knew what that would look like. I understood, because of enough experience, a couple of decades of experience, of what that was going to be. It would have been more of the same. I really hoped that things were going to change, but I all of a sudden one day kind of realized they're not. This is actually, I have to make a really huge change here. And I think for a while I'd known it was coming, but I really didn't want it to be the case. I did not want to get divorced. I didn't want to disrupt my family. I didn't want to take all of us through that. At the time, I just really wanted my ex-husband to stop drinking. And he wasn't able to at that point. He has now, credit to him for that. He has now. But for a long time, at that point, before and after, that wasn't the case. So it's a really weird thing that I think so many people have had to go through, where you have to be the strongest, the most confident, the most in belief, and have the most faith when you really have no reason to have or feel any of that. Like at the very end of a marriage, when it's all falling apart, when you have to do this incredibly hard work of trying to reclaim yourself and find yourself again, you're just afraid. At least I was. I was just afraid. And at that point, and in that place, and in that energy, you have to figure out how to get out in the world and make a living and support a family and make it work. And energy is a big deal. So you kind of have to fake it, I would say, in a way. I would compartmentalize it, might even be the right term. So even though it's all falling apart, I still have to function as an employee of some sort. So I guess I have some experience in putting myself into a situation that maybe I didn't even really have any business to be in. I certainly didn't have a qualified background, for example, but it was the right thing to do at the time. And I figured out how to make it work because I truly believe that we find out the most about ourselves when there's a lot of opposition, when there's a lot of difficulty, when we are really, really struggling. What is it that we can do then? Because we have really two options, and you can make different decisions on different days as well. You know, if one day you need to kind of pull it in and sort of shut down, you can. But most days you can't. Most days you have to keep it going. Most days you have to get out there and live life, even when you really, really would rather not. And it's a very isolating feeling unless you happen to be really, like around other people who are also going through the same thing, which I think can help. But a lot of the time it's not the case, There's not ever really anyone that understands exactly where you're coming from. So there's some compartmentalization, which, you have to be careful with, but it is necessary, I think, at times to kind of to get yourself through those very early days. Because, and this is something that people repeat all of the time, but it is in fact true. The only way through anything is through it. You have to go through it. There isn't really a way to skip it, whatever it is. But I got myself finally to a place where I had achieved and created a level of financial and emotional stability for myself and my children. And that was wonderful. But I realized shortly after that I think that I have more to contribute. Well, I hope I have more to contribute. And I started to really think about when I was very young, I was really interested in the idea of purpose. What was it that we were each individually here to do? And I really think that everybody has a purpose. And I really think that, often we refer to that as potential. But I think the idea is that everybody has this zone of genius. I really think everybody has this. And it's very individual. It's very unique. It's kind of a combination of maybe talent or aptitude and interest and almost like proliferation. So I had no idea what this was for me. I tended to work the hardest at things I was not good at. That seemed like a virtuous thing to do. So if something is hard, I should work harder at it. I should try to master the things that are difficult, the things that are challenging. And I muddled through that way for a really long time. And I think that there was value in it. I was a really weird combination of, I don't even really know how to describe it, but definitely maybe a confusing person for teachers or parents or even like friends, because when I look back now, especially when I was young, there was a lot that I was, experiencing and understanding and wanting to converse about or talk about that could be at a what might feel like a higher level. But then there's other things that were just extremely challenging for me. And I'm sure it was confusing. So I don't think I was ever a great student. I could get really good grades, particularly if I cared about the topic or the teacher. So if I could engage with the teacher, I could usually find enough reason or enough juice to get interested in the topic. if I didn't like the topic or I didn't really care about it and I didn't like the teacher, it was unlikely that I would do particularly well in that class. I did care about my grades, but there was a degree of caring. I think I cared more if my group of friends cared, or if I thought that I would get positive attention from my parents. But a lot of the time, I didn't feel like my brain really worked the same way as everyone else's. I felt very, very um, weirdly like alone. And it's so funny. I was talking to a friend from that I grew up with, and we've been in touch very, very infrequently, off and on over the years, but we have kids of similar ages and we have similar religious backgrounds, and we were close when we were young. Well, close to the degree I could be close. And I remember she said, it was so funny. She's like, "You were so cool." She's like, you were such a cool person. And I just, it's so funny because no, there's nothing about me that's in any way cool. What I was detached. I struggled to bond. I was aloof at times. There were things I didn't understand and about everything. And I was so uncomfortable being really vulnerable about what was challenging for me. I was not cool. I held people kind of at arm's length. I didn't understand that that's what I was doing, but I look back now and it was. I did. If you got too close to me, I might start to tell you about all of the stuff that was, going on at home. I might start to tell you about all of the things about my religion that I was confused about. I might have started to tell you that I'm not that smart and I'm definitely not cool and I don't know if I'm a good friend and I'm not sure what it is that I'm capable of or not. So I wasn't cool, but she thought that I was, which was just a misinterpretation of something else entirely. I wonder how many people who we think of as cool are actually kind of more like that. Like, no, I just sort of hold people at arm's length because being really close is so uncomfortable. I just don't know how to do it. Um, I don't know, but it was so eye-opening to me that that's how she felt. And in some ways, it was like it was painful for me to recognize that what I really deeply craved was available to me with the people who I knew when I was young, but I struggled. I didn't really know how to connect. I didn't really know how to be vulnerable. I didn't really know how to bond with other people. That seemed like a risky thing to do. And a really great way to get hurt is to let people know too much about you, to let people know. It was just better to let people have their assumptions, I think. That was fine. So I recognize now that I've had this difficulty my whole life because I've understood certain things very instinctually. Sometimes maybe intuitively, but I wouldn't have known that at the time. But then a lot I'm very perplexed by. I think had a poor education. Not probably the fault of anyone who attempted to educate me, probably my own fault. But regardless, there's a lot I don't understand and there's a lot that I just really don't know. So here I am in my, late 30s with this beautiful family, these kids to take care of. My life looks nothing like I thought that it was going to look like when I started it, what I was told. So I have to refigure out like, well, what? Okay, if I failed at marriage, if I haven't, done anything that matters, I mean, not, I guess in the greater collective. And, here I figured out a job and I figured out how to care for my family and I figured out how to, at my job, I face things that make me scared every single day or a lot of days. I can talk about that more later, but I started to think that maybe there was something that I was here to do or like that I was capable of that was more like a purpose. And maybe I had read the book about Ikigai I don't know. Who knows how I got onto this particular idea that I really wanted to know what my purpose was. But I started to think about it a lot and read about, you know, I guess things around it and adjacent to it. I left my childhood faith when I was in my mid-20s, and that was extremely disruptive to my life at the time. But I think that in some ways I had to go through this period of like anger and mourning, and then it took a while to put the pieces back together and to rebuild what I really thought. So if you've been told what to think your whole life, if you've been told what's right or wrong, you don't have a lot of access to your own sense of knowing. You don't have a lot of access to your intuition, to, I mean, your gut, your heart. I definitely understood the intellectual part of figuring things out pretty well. But there was this like whole other thing that I wasn't accessing. I didn't even know how, because authority came from outside of me always. Permission came from outside of me always. It was taught to me to be specifically from God through men, and then filtered down through other leaders and teachers, and then told to me. So I really think that I was trying really hard to follow all of the rules. I believed everyone who taught me that the rules really mattered. I believed everybody. I really wanted to be good. We use the term righteous a lot. Devout, all in. It was hard when sometimes the things I would be learning about didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Not like super, but I think I've always been kind of a spiritual person in the idea that I do believe in this connectedness that exists between people and nature and between some like bigger energetic, how the heck do I know? But some form of connectedness, interconnectedness that I guess I've just understood exists. I was definitely not really taught that, but it is a conclusion that I made. It is a conclusion that I came to, I guess, over time. Anyway, so at midlife, it became important to me to understand all on my own, using my own brain and heart and gut and intuition and feelings and energy. What am I doing here? Is there a purpose? Maybe, and if the answer was that you don't have one, I guess I could have accepted that. But what is it? What is it? What is it? And I was starting to listen to different people's theories and ideas of a couple of things. One, that often there is a purpose, or we can feel very driven to do something, and it could be a creative pursuit or an intellectual pursuit, or the rage to master something, or creative pursuit, just this thing that compels us to do something. What is that? Because some people seem to really have it, or they really, really know what it is that they're supposed to do or how they're going to contribute. So I wanted to know if that existed for me. And I'd already been in the process of kind of seeing myself differently, because so much of what I had set up fell apart. So much of what I'd kind of leaned into and banked on and believed fell apart. So, it's so cliche to say that we're grateful for all of the times when things all fell apart because of something that happened next. And what's funny about it is there is no gratitude in the moment. I mean, if there's anybody out there who has actively experienced horrible things and I'm so grateful that this is happening to me, I don't believe that. I do think, however, that we can get perspective later. In the moment of going through something that's it's just, ugh, it's just hard. It's just oppressive. It's just heavy. It's just difficult. I think the heavy, oppressive, difficult pain, though, I think maybe that is part of what helps to build the strength, to then like, okay, the reason we're grateful for it isn't because it's happened. The reason we're grateful for it is because of what we learned and what kind of strength we developed, or some combination of those two things. So the idea, though, that I should be incredibly grateful or insightful or aware while something horrible is happening to me, I think is, nah, I think that's ridiculous. And that might just be denial in a moment. But anyway, I do know that being afraid is hard. The reason that there's so much conversation, I think, about vulnerability, about shame, is because, well, there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunity to experience both of those things. And I would say that they kind of go hand in hand. Um, so for me, I was accidentally practicing a lot of vulnerability in the job that I was doing. I was showing up to people's houses who I have not met before, which is in and of itself vulnerable, needing to be an expert about complex issues that I was, learning about, but we're always continuing to learn. I don't know everything, gosh. And needing to really put myself into this like problem solving place. And what I realized was I lost my sense of self-awareness, like in the moment where I could feel afraid or I could feel overly observed. I realized that when given the opportunity to try to help somebody solve a problem that they were having that I could help with, I kind of would almost lose a sense of myself. I didn't know what I looked like. I didn't know how I sounded. I didn't know often even necessarily what I was saying. I almost kind of could tap into, for a brief period of time, this state of flow. And something started to happen where, and I don't understand this, but where the people who I was interacting with, which were mostly random people who called in my company, I happened to be assigned to them. I would go out, but they would start to talk to me about really, 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 and like personal details of their lives. It didn't bother me. I mean, at all, because I had no idea why, but I was just comfortable. Yeah. In that place where people were being like really vulnerable. I guess it just didn't really freak me out. I could understand to the best of my ability. I could understand. I met a lot of people going through divorce. I met a lot of people who were, struggling with a million different things. I met a lot of people who were, in difficulty in relationships, who are trying to figure it out. I don't know, something about being at someone's home, especially if there's an identified problem. I guess vulnerability might have been easier, but I recognize this was happening again and again and again and again. So I started to try to find out maybe if that had something to do with my purpose. Like I could keep doing this job and showing up randomly at people's houses, and when people needed it, here's an opportunity for them to talk to a stranger about things that are important, significant, terrifying, wonderful. Most people talk about things that are scary more than they talk about things that are great. But, it gave me a little bit of an idea of, okay, so I would ask other people who were doing a similar job, is this happening to you? And they said, no. I said, okay, interesting. And for a while I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to write about this. At some point I had recognized that I maybe had some ability around writing. I don't know if it's a lot or not, but basically I was trying to find my zone of genius. And I don't think it's very woo-woo. I think it's just attempting to recognize where is it that your output is going to far exceed your input into something, because that is probably a place where you want to focus your time and your energy. And I thought about, I went back to school as an adult to finish my bachelor's degree. So I had not finished it when I was younger. And I really, really worked hard in math. I had to take calculus and all kinds of stuff that was really hard. And I wasn't picking it up very quickly. I don't even know that I was necessarily a super slow learner with math, but I was not a fast learner, and I didn't retain what I learned particularly well. In fact, I was just slow at it. I had a timed test that I had to take in a calculus class, and the instructor of that class is actually someone who I really, really appreciated. He was formerly a professor of math at like West Point. So he was really, really disciplined. And so he had a timed test and you needed to be done by the time it was over. And I was still taking the test and he let me finish it, but he'd said multiple times, like 30 minutes before I had finished it, if you haven't finished it yet, you don't know the material, you're not prepared. And I thought, oh, shoot, they might be right. It was taking me a long time. I understood in that moment I was supposed to have been faster at solving all of these problems on this test. So, what was interesting though is later on, he actually changed his policy because he came up and talked to me and he said, that took you forever. It's like, I know. It was like 3 hours. It was painful. But if you got an A on his test, he brought you like a candy bar. So he was handing me this candy bar and he goes, that test took you forever. And I said, I know it did. But he's handing me a candy bar, which meant I got an A. And he says, I just want you to know I revised my policy that if people need to take longer on the test, they can. He says, I always thought that if it took you that long, you hadn't studied and you didn't know the material. Basically, he was just telling me that I was slow, but that I did know it. It just took me a long time. Anyway, that was good. But I worked really, 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 really hard in math. And I was able to successfully get an A, but it did not matter how hard I worked in math. I was never going to be great at math. I don't remember most of what it was that I learned at that point. I can remember general concepts. I do not remember equations, and I do not remember how to perform them. Even though I really studied, I really worked hard. But at the same time I was taking that class, I was in a business law class, and I think I had to write like a 15 to 20 page paper on a particular case study in this business law class. And, I was working really hard at studying for my calculus at the time, but I had to kind of get it done. And, most of the time you got to just do the work. So I started writing up the outline for it and filling in the blanks as I went. And I looked at the paper and felt like I had done what I was asked and revised it to make things like a little bit clearer, but generally didn't work particularly hard on that paper. I don't know if I didn't really care a ton about it. I mean, I felt like the concept was relatively easy to understand. Business law is an interesting thing because there's a lot of rules. It's law. So there was plenty for me to reference to make sure that I had done what was asked of me. So I turned in the paper. I felt like it was fine. I knew I could have done a lot more. I knew I probably could have dug a lot deeper, or understood the concepts like at a better level, or, made a more compelling argument. I don't really know. I just knew that wasn't my best work. I mean, I just needed to get it done. And so I got it done. So I turned in that paper, and I don't think it was a final, but I remember the professor, he came up to me or emailed me or something. First of all, he gave me higher than 100%, which was weird. Okay, I think like I got like 104% on the paper, which I thought, I didn't even know there was supposed to have been extra credit in it, but okay. And then he asked me if I would sign a release form so that he could use my paper as part of his curriculum moving forward. And I know that in that moment, you're supposed to feel like really good about something like that. Like I was being acknowledged for having written a paper that he thought was good and that was a good example. But I honestly was frustrated. I said sure, and I signed the release, but I was so frustrated. Like, why don't you know that I didn't work hard enough on that? Like, why are you acting like this is good? It's not. I could have done so much better. I could have tried so much harder. I was so frustrated. And I realized when it came to writing like essays and papers, I would always get what I felt like was confusing feedback like that. I felt like I'm phoning it in. I'm not really working as hard as I could be. This isn't my greatest level of effort. I'm just doing it and turning it into you. And you're acting like it's this big deal. And it made me angry because I felt like I don't know if I don't, it's not that I thought that they were lying to me. I just was angry that they didn't understand that that wasn't good enough and that I could have done better. But they were giving me too much. They were just telling me that it was so great when I was like, no, it's not, you know. Anyway, it's really weird. My reaction to not having put a lot of effort into something and getting really positive feedback on it wasn't positive attention. It was negative. It was annoying to me. I was frustrated. I'm like, but I worked so hard at the math. But I recognized something looking back on that. It was actually a little bit of a tell that my efforts are probably better spent potentially writing than doing math or understanding some other thing. And I think that that's actually, it's a good thing to understand about ourselves. And I don't actually know if I'm even a very good writer anymore. I have no idea. But I think that that exists for every single person. So I decided to try to pursue that a little bit. I thought in the beginning, maybe it's writing, but I kept asking the collective whatever, the universe, what is my purpose? What is my purpose? What is my purpose? What is my purpose? And one day I got this answer and it was like pretty clear. And it just kind of was like, came to me as like words in my head. It wasn't like I heard a voice or anything like that. And it just said, to teach, speak, and write. So I wrote that down, to teach, speak, and write. And I thought, okay, well, the writing kind of makes sense. The teaching I did not understand at all. And the speaking was like, what does that mean? You know, what does that mean? What the heck is, okay, like what? It was confusing to me at the time, but I wrote it down. The writing is the thing that I kind of thought about and understood. And okay, well, that makes sense. So I started to try to understand like about what though. Like you can teach and speak and write, but what am I supposed to be teaching and speaking and writing about? And what does that even look like? And I wouldn't say that those answers came quickly for me because they didn't. I'm starting to understand them now. I'm starting to understand them better now, but I am still figuring it out. In the process of trying to find a business development group to work into so that I can figure out what the heck I'm supposed to be doing, which I still thought was going to be writing like a website or a blog or something. I don't know. I don't even know how people write anymore. I'm supposed to write a book. I don't know. But I don't have anything to write about, I didn't think. And, but more and more when I would be in these groups with other people who are also trying to either heal trauma or deal with themselves or get to know themselves better. I don't know, whatever it is that we collectively do together or are figuring out what their business is supposed to be, or they have a business idea, but they want to move it forward. And more with women, a lot of times there is a business idea, but it's also in the realm of like, and I also want to help people. You know, most things that I hear from women are in that like type of idea, like service-based or something like that. Bringing their own unique skill towards helping other people. It's pretty common. But I kept kind of getting this feedback saying, well, you should be, you need to talk more. I don't know. It's weird. But it kind of made me laugh because growing up, the only thing I definitely knew about myself based on feedback from adults was I talked too much. I talked too much. I asked too many questions and I talked too much. In fact, I want to say in my feedback from teachers growing up, she talks too much to other people at times. Maybe not always focused in the way that I should be. That's true. I mean, sometimes talking to people about what they've got going on is way more interesting than whatever we were supposed to have been learning at the time. I think I still did fine. I don't think teachers disliked me. I wasn't like rude or mean or combative or disruptive or anything like that. But I did want to talk to people. I'm super interested in everything. Sometimes I think I'm like a little slow. So I have to like ask more questions to figure out more that everyone else seems to understand, but their understanding of it is different than the way I want to understand it. So I was getting this feedback about speaking and I just thought like, oh no, I talk too much. I talk too fast. I'm just felt terrified. I felt a sense of shame, but I thought, well, I would do it if people thought that it was valuable. And so that noise got louder. More people, I still thought I was going to be writing. And then it came up, hey, have you thought about podcasting? And I really enjoy listening to podcasting. I love relational podcasting. I love when people are asking each other about things that they know or get really deep into a story. I love storytelling. I like things that feel kind of like fluid and organic and that really kind of get me engaged or that help me to think about something in a way that I definitely wouldn't have thought about it before. I really, really love that kind of thing. So I was familiar, obviously, with podcasts. I think that they're pretty popular, but there's a few things I know about podcasts. One is everybody has one. You know, every single person who seems to have some level of fame or is a comedian or is everybody has a podcast. And there's a lot. There's a huge number of them. The market's probably oversaturated. I don't know. I think that it's great. And I hope that it continues. But I immediately went, oh, no, that's way too scary. Mm-mm. You know, I don't know. But why does anybody want to hear anything I have to say? I'm not famous. I don't know famous people. I'm not particularly wealthy. I'm not particularly accomplished. I'm not particularly, I mean, there's just no reason. There's just not really like this reason that I could have pointed to. People kind of kept telling me to do it. But, you know, ultimately, anything that you're going to do, you do have to actually decide deep down that you think that it's valuable. So I recognized something. I started to practice. I've known about myself for a while that I talk, process through things. And what that means for me is I am not always completely aware of what I'm saying before I say it. A lot of times I am speaking through as I'm trying to understand something. And when I auditorily hear the words being spoken, even if they're from me, I can make new connections that I wouldn't have just from reading something. So that was an interesting thing to recognize. It helped me to feel a little bit better about the fact that I do talk. It feels like I can talk a lot. My children are actually very different than I am. And it took us a while to really get it sorted out because I can say a lot of things, but I haven't necessarily concluded anything yet. Whereas my two youngest children, they're really different. Their approach to talking is very different. They really spend a lot of time internally understanding exactly what it is that they want to say and how they want to express themselves. And only when they really have it figured out do they then talk and say what they want to say. Well, I didn't understand that they were functioning that way, and they didn't necessarily understand that my functioning was different. So we had to kind of negotiate it. We had to sort of figure out, okay, I really upset you, my son, when I say, are you sure, after you said something to me? Because I'm knowing that when I say something, it doesn't mean I'm sure. And for him, he would get offended. Like, why are you asking me that? I already said this. So we had to get into this like deeper conversation about recognizing that we really used conversational language differently from each other in the same household. But I started to practice recording myself because I was listening to these recorded phone calls from this business group that I had been in. And this is going to sound weird, but I recognized I didn't really mind hearing myself speak on the recorded calls, which I think is interesting just because most of the time, like, we don't like how we sound when we're recorded. I hear that from people all the time. They don't like how they sound. I didn't really have much to say about like the tone of my voice. I thought I talked too fast at times, but I was getting engaged into my own conversation with someone else because, again, I'm not always completely aware of what it is that I'm saying. And so when I got to go back and listen to it, I actually felt like I was I was engaged, but I was kind of like learning something. I know that sounds weird, but it is in fact what happened. So I started practicing more and more and more, just sort of talking out loud in the car and recording it to get myself used to the idea of doing it. And sometimes it went pretty well. And other times I could tell that my level of distraction was super high while I was driving a lot of the time. And also talking, which is not illegal, but it didn't make for the best ability to figure anything out. I would ramble more. But I learned that I would go back and listen and I didn't dislike it. I was like, I think that this is okay. So I would let other people listen, and sometimes a lot of times they would thought it was good too. I don't, again, I think it can be confusing to me because it's an area I feel a lot of insecurity. I feel a lot of insecurity, not about how I sound when I speak, but all of those years of being young and being told to just stop talking, stop asking questions. Why can't you just accept that this is the way that it is? Why do you have to know the ins and the outs of everything? My mom used to think that I was like obstinate. She used to think that I was like difficult, would drive her crazy because I wanted to know why. I'm still occasionally, especially like in business, I know that at times, like hold on, I have like 8 more questions here before I can accept that we have come to a conclusion that is going to work for what we're talking about. And the reason is that my brain is just vetting of the fringes of things. I'm not done yet. You guys are saying this is what we're doing, but I have several more questions. And what I have found happens is through those several more questions, we do have to shift things a little bit because there are things that I'm thinking about that are not being thought about. And it used to frustrate some of the people that I work with, one of the people that I work with. It could frustrate them because I think that occasionally I can have an intensity behind this desire to continue talking about something. And people don't really like to be challenged and don't really like to be told that they haven't found the perfect solution yet. But none of us have found the perfect solution to anything. None of us have ever found the perfect solution to anything. It's not real. So, you know, I I feel like I would have to kind of get strong because I started to believe that I actually had something valuable to add. But I work with a lot of men, almost all men, and I realized that they definitely had come from a culture where I wouldn't say that women's opinions and voices were equal at times. And so I had to push past that, and it was uncomfortable, and it made me feel like afraid sometimes. I just did not like it. But I realized that when I think that something is important, I'm willing to be afraid and do it anyway. So the whole topic today of I'm afraid, it's the truth. I am afraid. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of all of this. I kind of wrap my head around the podcast thing right up until I recognize that you have to have your video camera on now. I don't want to have my video camera on now because that feels even more vulnerable. I feel like I'm opening myself up even to more types of criticism from people. It definitely feels intense. But I'm new at it. It's going to get easier for me. It's going to get better. I'm going to have more opportunity to experience all of this in ways that aren't going to feel so intensely terrifying. Right now, it just feels terrifying. I am committed to doing it anyway. I am going to do 100 episodes of this podcast, and then I'll think about it. I'll evaluate it. I'll decide if I'm on the right track or not. I don't know. But if you are listening to this right now, then, I would love for you to be along for the ride. And I have no advice for anyone ever because I just don't think that that's a thing. But one thing I know for sure is that so often, and I hope this is going to be true, but I don't know yet, but I hope it's going to be true. And I'm having faith that it is. So often, something really amazing can be right on the other side of I'm afraid and I don't want to do it. And I don't mean bad afraid. I mean excited afraid. a little terrified, afraid, but there's excitement in there too. There is hope. There's a little hope. There's a little hope that maybe there's something here, you know, maybe there is something that is going to be valuable for someone. And I said this before, but I really mean it. Well, even if one person gets something positive out of this, it could even just be that I'm the only one that gets something positive out of it. But if one person gets something positive out of it, it's worth doing. It's worth doing. It's worth putting the time and the energy and the effort and the resources and the everything else into. And then this is the big one. It's worth being a little bit afraid and doing it anyway. I am going to leave it at that. And if you're watching this, I hope you have a great day.